what's it actually like to be you? I mean, really think about it. That feeling, the experience of seeing color, hearing music, feeling an emotion, it's probably the single greatest mystery in all of science. Today, we're diving headfirst into the consciousness paradox. So let me start by asking a question that might sound, well, a little bit crazy. Are you absolutely positive there's only one you in there? It seems obvious, right? But this question is at the very heart of a huge scientific puzzle, one that challenges the most basic thing we think we know about ourselves, that inside our head there's a single, unified me. Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, we have to start with a philosopher named David Chalmers. He basically framed the entire puzzle by asking not just how the brain works, but why it feels like anything at all, to be a working brain. And this became famously known as the hard problem of consciousness. What Chalmers did, which was really brilliant, was he divided the whole thing into two categories. On the left, you've got what he called the easy problems. And trust me, easy is a very relative term here. They're about function. How does the brain focus? How does it report what it's doing? How does it control our bodies? These are all puzzles about mechanism that science, can eventually solve. But the hard problem, on the right, that's a whole different beast. It's about experience. Why isn't all that incredible processing just happening in the dark? And that's the core of the mystery. We're talking about the subjective, inner quality of things. The what it's likeness of seeing the color red, or hearing a certain note, or feeling a rush of joy. See, explaining how the brain processes light waves of a certain frequency, that's one thing. But explaining why that processing creates the actual experience of redness, well, that's the massive gap science is desperately trying to cross. So how in the world are scientists trying to solve this thing? Well, you can think of the investigation as having two lead detectives. There are two major scientific theories right now, both competing to explain how consciousness just happens from the 3 pounds of wet stuff inside our skulls. So let's meet the suspects. First up, we've got the global neuronal workspace theory, or GNWT for short. The best analogy for this one is a spotlight on a stage. The idea is that a piece of information becomes conscious when it gets selected by the brain's main control center, up in the prefrontal cortex, and then it's broadcast widely across the brain for all the other systems to use. Then you've got its rival, integrated information theory, or IIT. Now, this theory cares less about a big broadcast and way more about the structure of the network itself. It says consciousness emerges from this incredibly interconnected, irreducible web of information, and it thinks the hotspot for this is mainly in the back of the brain, in the posterior cortex. So one theory is all about access, the other is all about structure. And this isn't just some philosophical coffee shop debate, okay? In a pretty landmark project, scientists from both camps actually got together to run adversarial experiments, putting their predictions to the test, head to head. And the result? It was incredibly messy. Yeah, there was no knockout punch. The first analysis gave a slight edge to IAT, but then again, GNWT also got some things right. What this tells us is that the real answer is probably way more complicated than either of these theories alone. So with our two leading theories kind of locked in a stalemate, the investigation takes a hard left turn and calls a surprising and frankly almost unbelievable witness to the stand. This testimony doesn't come from a new brain scanner or a fancy experiment. It comes from a small group of patients who have gone through one of the most radical surgeries you can even imagine. We're talking about split brain patients. In these people, the corpus callosum, which is basically the information superhighway connecting the left and right sides of the brain, has been surgically cut. It's a pretty drastic procedure, done to stop debilitating epileptic seizures. But what it also does is stop the two halves of the brain from talking to each other, and that has led to some of the absolute weirdest and most mind-bending findings in the history of neuroscience. Okay, so check this out. Here's how a classic split brain experiment works. You flash an image, let's say a key, to the patient's left visual field. Now, because of how our brains are wired, that information goes only to the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere, it's mostly nonverbal. So when you ask the patient, hey, what did you see? Their speaking left hemisphere, which literally saw nothing, honestly says, I didn't see anything. But here comes the twist. You then say, okay, with your left hand, just pick up the object you saw. And that left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere that did see the key, will reach out and correctly grab the key, all while the speaking part of the brain is completely baffled. I mean, that is just staggering stuff, right? Experiments like that led to a pretty radical idea that cutting the corpus callosum literally splits consciousness in two. It looked like two separate, independent conscious minds were now living inside one head. But as researchers kept digging, the story got a whole lot messier.
And here's the massive paradox. Outside of these super specific lab experiments, split brain patients are, well, they're just normal. They say they feel exactly the same as they did before the surgery. Their friends, their family, they all see them as the same single person they've always been. They don't walk around feeling like two different people in one body. This social ordinariness, as researchers call it, just doesn't fit with that simple two minds theory at all. And the more scientists looked, the more evidence for unity they found. These patients could coordinate both hands to do complex things. They could see an object moving across the center of their vision, even though the information was split. Both hemispheres could recognize a picture of the patient's own face. And maybe the craziest part, they could accurately point to where a light flashed even when the speaking hemisphere swore it never saw the flash in the first place. It's like perception can be split, but action and knowing where things are in space can somehow stay whole.
So this completely contradictory evidence from our star witness, the split brain patient, leaves us in a really fascinating but also deeply puzzling place. It throws a huge wrench into the case for both of our leading theories of consciousness. So here it is. This is the core puzzle that keeps neuroscientists up at night. Both of our main theories, the one about a global broadcast and the one about an integrated network, they both pretty much predict that if you split the brain, you should split consciousness. It's the most logical conclusion, right? And yet, the actual evidence from these patients just screams something else entirely. The hardware can be physically cut in two, but the subjective experience of being a single person somehow, remarkably, stays whole. How is that even possible? And this brings us all the way back to where we started. But now that first question feels so much heavier, doesn't it? If a brain that's been physically divided can still feel like one unified mind, what does that say about our own sense of self? Is that feeling you have right now of being a single you? Is it just a really convincing story your brain is telling itself? Or is consciousness something that can somehow survive even the deepest physical split? This is still one of the greatest unsolved mysteries we have. And it just reminds us that the biggest puzzle in the universe is the one looking out through our own eyes.